All right, there we go. So let's talk about some lights here. So what I've done is just kind of made a simple scene with some duplications of some spheres and a plane. So this is the easiest way to represent, how different lights types affect your 3D environment. So where you find lights is under Create, Lights, right there. So I'm just going to rip this off, kind of tuck it over here, or maybe over here. And let's bring up the outliner right here, and let's get rid of this poly count thing here. We don't need that, just more distracting. So let's make a simple point light. This is probably the easiest to understand. So this is a point light. If I was to press this little button right here, it says use all lights or 7, displays that. So you can see that, how that affects your light. So imagine this as a single point of light radiating outward is the best way to explain this, especially when you bring it out here. See that? Huh? Hitting 7 or hitting this button right here. So you got textures right here if you want textures to show up and lights at the same time. Or 6 and 7. So that's it with it off and it on. Now, you could turn on this next one right here, turn on shadows. Now, sometimes this doesn't always work depending on the type of light in the viewport. So if your scene's a little bit more simplistic, or usually it's a different type of light, shadows does turn on. But it's not working in this case because I don't think Maya can handle showing that many shadows. So right now there is no shadows in the scene. What you're seeing is the shading around the objects. But a point light, it's pretty easy to understand what's happening here. Let's go to the attribute editor for this light. So we've got color. We click on that. Red color. Intensity. All right? Pretty easy. Do we want this light to be specular? Does it want, you know that little highlight that you see on really shiny surfaces? Do you want this light to have highlights on your shaders? You can actually turn that off. Which is great if you have a bunch of lights in your scene. And you imagine, anybody's ever heard of 3-point lighting? You've heard of it? You've heard of it. From where? Very good. So, 3-point lighting. All those lights actually cause some extra highlights. So if you got a key light coming down here, and you have a fill light coming from down here, and another like backlight, each light is going to add a little bit of an extra specular highlight, which sometimes can be taken out in Photoshop. Sometimes that light is usually a bigger light source, so it's a softer light, so you don't get that harsh highlight. If you don't want 3 highlights hitting your object, what you do is if you got a 3-point light setup, what you're going to do is whatever your main light source, you leave emit specular turned on, and then the other ones turn it off. And then that main light mimics that is the main light source, because that highlight is coming from that direction, hitting that surface. So that's what this does. Emit diffuse means does it, emit color, basically. And to a certain degree, you kind of need that. There's certain tricks to this, but that's beyond what you guys are doing right now. Now, decay rate. So, okay, imagine a flashlight, right? You go outside with a flashlight, really dark. Thanks. Okay. All right. Well, then that just give me the flashlight now. Now you're just flashing that stuff around here. Just give it to me. All right. Now go turn off all the lights. All right. So this is, again, a really small surface, but there's a decay to that light, right? It actually, that's fine. I mean, what, you do a twist? Yeah. Right here, you can see that light decays over time, or distance, I should say, right? So how do you mimic that in 3D? Right now, in 3D, if you want to turn on the single one back on, what happens there is that in 3D, the light is infinite. It just keeps on going. You know, that's what decay rate, and that's what it says, no decay. That's what it's set to by default. If you want that light to mimic more of real lighting, where it eventually dies off over time, you drop it to one of these. This is linear, and you got to maybe increase it, but look at the fall off there. It's the decay over distance, right? So there's different equations for how this is calculated. The most accurate to real life is quadratic. But for this to really work, you really got to crank this baby up. See? You really got to drive you got to drive it pretty hot to make it work. Now the problem is if I drop this down to linear, whoa, or even no decay, it's too much. So depending on what decay you're using will define your intensity. So you got to play around and see what works for your scene. That's what's happening within the main panel there of the lights. Now there's you can add like a fog to it if you wanted. Again, this is kind of sometimes can be problematic. That depends. You can even add a little bit of a glow to the light. That's actually pretty cool if you wanted to do that. Here's the most important one, though. If you come down to shadows, you can actually change the shadow color. So if you don't want your shadows to be black, which is typical, right? You know, or like lighter shades of black, grays, and stuff like that, you can actually change them to be like any color you want. It's kind of weird, but by default, we usually leave that black. But you can change it. It's kind of interesting. You might want to play around with that later. But we've got two different shadow types. We've got ray trace shadows, which turns on by default, and depth map shadows. Depth map shadows render faster, but they are less accurate. Ray trace shadows takes a little bit longer to calculate, but are more accurate to real shadows and how they act in the real world. So depending on what you're trying to do, if you're just trying to get some quick shadows and to get the idea of shadows, you can use depth map shadows. If you want more accuracy, you go with the ray trace. Now the ray trace, you know, if you have a nice CPU, really won't take you that much long, and there's no point in going to depth map shadows. Depth map shadows was something that was developed with a long time ago for old CPUs to get shadows quickly without the extra calculation of the ray tracing. But now that CPUs have been, you know, they're really powerful nowadays, this is not so bad to just keep it on ray tracing. It actually does pretty decently. So this is becoming more of an older method. Now, if you have a scene with a million polys and you got shadows in there, you might want to think about depth map shadows to, you know, speed up a little bit of that process. That's up to you. Again, it's a lot of testing back and forth to see which one works better for your scene. If those shadows are far away from the camera, depth map shadows. If those shadows are up close, ray trace. It's just more how accurate do you want those to be? And that will dictate. Now, using the depth map shadows it's a texture. So, if you want blurrier shadows, you keep it at a lower resolution, like 512. And you can drop that down again in powers of 2. So you can go down to a 256. And that will define that depth map shadow as a little bit of a blurrier image. And then if you want more high quality shadow, I should say, you would increase it to like 1024 or a 2048. And you get more accurate shadows, sharper shadows. So let's do an example of that. So what I'm going to do is I've got depth map shadows turned on right now. And the only way you're going to see this, let's also drop this. I'm going to keep node decay rate on. There we go. We'll see what we get. Yeah, that's too distracting. Too many shadows. Let's build a different environment here so you guys can actually see this. So I'm going to take all that. Let's take all that and group it together. So it's not such a... So there we go. Select that, and then I'll just hide it for right now. And let's go with a simple cube and just build a simple cylinder here. So you can actually, or box or cube, and we'll make this sit right over here. Get this off the ground. All right. Move those over. Let's see what this does. All right. There it is. So you can see right away when I'm looking at this and rendering it, what does that shadow give me the illusion? Yeah, someone want to hit the lights again? Go one more down because it's just a little harder to see. Do you see something wrong with my object right now? It looks like it's floating. So a shadow defines how its orientation to the ground, how high it is. So you always have to be kind of like, all right, bring that down. Now I'll re-render it. So the shadow right away will tell you if your object's grounded or not. So right now you can see, let's take a look at my light. Depth map shadows. Actually, it's looking pretty good right now. Let's drop this resolution though. Let's go to a power of resolution of 64. See how blurry that shadow became? Look how pixelated it's becoming. That's depth map shadows. That's what's happening there. So the more I drop this number, the blurrier it becomes because the resolution is there. Now you could always go in here and go down to this filter, and then this will kind of clean it up, but it always make it look blurry. It's always going to look blurry, but it just cleans up the blurriness so it doesn't look so pixelated. See how it cleaned that up?
There's certain instances where the less than sharp shadow edge is useful.
Yes. Yes. So there's the difference between the two. Do you guys see that? And that's just playing with the filter size to clean that up. Now, if you want a more accurate shadow, crank it up. Look at that. You know, just crank up that filter a little bit to clean up that edge. Needs a little bit more work. Also, my render settings are not set to the most optimal quality either. So I'm just trying to do, right now I'm rendering for speed, not accuracy, just to test it out. But you're starting to see the difference. But the thing is, here's the thing you got to remember. it's blurry across the whole, from where the shadow starts all the way across. It's blurry. It's the same blurry intensity all the way from where the shadow starts until all the way until it goes off the plane. So that is not an accurate shadow. An accurate shadow is, let's see if we can just find something. Let's see if we can find an example of a shadow outside. Let's see. Something, these are close. Yeah, that's a really good example. All right. Take a look at this image right here. See how sharp that shadow is to the base of that object? And then as it gets further away, it becomes blurrier and blurrier. Depth map shadows cannot do that. Just can't. So, but ray tracing can, which defines it as a more accurate shadow. I got to watch out what pops up on images here. Whoa, there was a couple risque ones up there. Trust me, that was not intentional. And now it won't go away. Holy cow. Trust me, that was not my point right there to have that happen. Excuse me. I was just trying, you saw me, I was just looking for shadows. And then I got some other things. So, all right. So that's what's happening here. It's quick, it's easy, but it's not the most accurate. Let's turn that off and let's go to what Maya does by default right here. So, trust me, this is default settings. We're going to have to play with this to get it more accurate. So, it's not going to be accurate right off the bat. Whoa. I'm not even getting a shadow. What's happening? Interesting. Let's go to mental ray. That's whatever. That doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, let's change the background color so you can actually see the defining edge there a little bit more. This is the reason why I don't like black backgrounds, because I know there's an object here, but this is black and that's black. I can't see it. This is the main reason why I don't like black backgrounds, because it's hard to define overall objects in the scene. So that's why I'm always a big adamant about going to your camera settings and going to environment and at least, change that up. It's rendering off screen. Give me a second. There. That's a little bit better. So you can actually see it. So you can see hard edge. It's actually a beautiful hard edge. It was better than the depth map shadows. So, hopefully everybody's paying attention because there might be a quiz on this. All right. So, there's that shadow. Now, let's go back to that light. And let's crank up the light radius. Let's save this render out. So this is a save button and this is a delete button. So you can actually check your renders as you go. Whoa. But it's starting to work here. See this? It's sharper here, blurrier here. The problem is it starts to introduce noise. So, and you also noticed that took 4 seconds. That took 8 seconds. More calculations. The more accurate you want your images to be, the longer the render times. So, that's just the name of the game. Right. So, you want to start cleaning that up? Go to the next attribute underneath that. Shadow rays. And crank that to, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, just something like that. Let's save this out. Do a compare and contrast. See the difference? It's subtle, but it starts to really clean that up. Yes, it reduces the noise. Just kind of cleans it up more. And that's how that is more accurate. Now, if you want less of this, just take that light radius and drop it down. So now there's not so much of a blurry effect at the end of that shadow. Again, maybe depending on the size of your scene, this light radius might have to go up to 50. Don't know. You have to render it, see what happens. This is a very labor-intensive, like, render it, check it, render it, change a setting. That's why I recommend this guy right up here, the IPR, which stands for? Oh, I don't think that menu's telling. Oh, no, what? Oh, it's like I planned it. Huh? Interactive Photographic Renderer, IPR. That's what it stands for. So, click this in, goes, what the hey? That's the way this works. Then you just, in here, you just select the region, and it renders it out. So it kind of sits there, kind of does a calculation, and done. But as soon as I decide to change it, all right? So the IPR will allow you to change your textures and change the attributes of your shaders. It also will help you with your lighting at the same time. So you don't have to go like do the whole thing. You can just do this little tiny section right here. Just do a little, select the region, and then, I want that to be less accurate. Oh, and look at that, more noise compared to that. Now, again, you could crank all these values up. The trick is finding a balance between what's acceptable quality and how long you want those render times to be. Because you can crank everything up, make it look beautiful. Next thing you know, you're going to have to go get that cup of coffee to see a render. Because it's going to take that long if you just crank everything up. Sometimes you just have to tweak it and see what's starting to look good for your scene and then leaving it at that. Because this could be a dark road that you guys could go down. And it's like, oh, yeah, it looks better if I do this. But then you're sitting there going, when's it going to finish? I want to move on to something else. And then might crash doing it. Yeah, so you kind of have to kind of play around with that to get what you want. So that's really the main difference. And then this ray depth limit is basically allows you to, if any objects are glass objects, it allows you to see reflections within the refractions of the glass. So it allows the beams of light or the ray tracing to happen inside the piece of glass for that particular shader. So we haven't got to that yet. I don't want to do that quite yet. So that's shadows, and those are the basic attributes here. So that's really the nuts and bolts of this particular light. Now, I can go in here and make a new light, or I can go to type and say, you know what? This point light, it's not what I want. Drop that menu down and say, you know what? Let's go with a directional light. Everything will pop in. There you go. Oh, now shadow's working. So, right there. See that? Now it's working for this light. Some lights it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you can see. It's kind of cool to see that interaction. So directional light will allow you to see that. But look at it. Roughly the same controls repeating themselves. That's why I spent so much time on that first one, because it's the same thing. Depth map shadows, ray trace shadows, kind of the same settings. All that will get you kind of very close to the same result. The shadow's going to be different because on the point light, the lights went out like a cone because that's where the beams of light are coming out from a single point. Think of this directional light as representing the light from the sun. So if you want to get some sunlight in there, anything like that, directional light is what you want to use. So if you want light coming in from a window, put the directional light outside and make sure shadows is turned on. So you get that shadow landing on the floor. So that is how that is working there. Now there is spotlight. There you go. Again, some of the same parameters, it's changed a little bit. We've got underneath the K rate, we've got cone angle. Look at what that's doing to that light. It's making it bigger. And then we got penumbra angle. Look at that edge right here. It's making it softer. And then we got a drop off. See, we're also getting a preview right here of that. Drop off just kind of makes it a little bit softer in the middle. Pretty easy to use. So you kind of play with it. Here's a quick little hit the T key on that light. T key. Look at that. That is your center of interest for this object. So now you can say, what do I want this light to point at?